Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the best recordings of Tchaikovsky's Symphony No. 6, the Pathétique. Now, the first thing we need to know is that pathétique does not mean pathetic. It means dramatic. It means emotional. It means turbulent. And I think that's kind of important because that's much more characteristic of the music than merely pathetic, although there is, of course, a certain element of pathos in the work as well. This is such a famous symphony, and there was a time when everybody recorded it. In fact, just about everybody still does. It's just that no one seems to care anymore. And I can't understand that. It is one of the great masterpieces of romantic music, for sure. Many people consider it Tchaikovsky's greatest symphony, probably because it's the most outwardly emotional and the one that perhaps most successfully reconciles form and content, namely the tragic and extremely, pathetic, I guess, more than tragic, finale, which was in itself something of a remarkable landmark in the history of symphonies, because to end with a slow movement, and a very dark slow movement at that, was quite the thing in the 1890s. And of course, the story about Tchaikovsky conducting it and then dropping dead like a few days later because he had cholera, and whether he actually had cholera, whether he really deliberately got cholera or tried to kill himself because he was having a homosexual affair, which he probably was. But that's another issue. It had biographical stuff attached to it. Even so, Tchaikovsky is kind of on the outs these days. I'm not sure why. I find that rather shocking and depressing at the same time, because the music is just so marvelous. And, it was one thing to sort of add Mahler to the canon. He started to maybe elbow Tchaikovsky out of the way a little bit. But nowadays, even Mahler is sort of, Mahler is incredibly popular, but, he's taking a backseat on records, at least, to Bruckner. Yeah, that guy. I can't figure it out. I think part of the problem with Tchaikovsky is that today's conductors just don't know how to conduct it. They don't know how to let go. They're a bunch of micromanaging boobies who are not terribly emotional. They're obsessed with the period instrument movement, which has sucked a lot of the expression out of orchestral playing. They like to manipulate things. They don't know how to play a tune. They don't understand sonata form. Doesn't this sound like a lot of just rampant, crazy generalizations? Well, yes, they are. And they are. There are some wonderful conductors out there, and some who actually can still do Tchaikovsky. But they're not getting a lot of acclaim for it. The fact of the matter is, Tchaikovsky's star, I wouldn't say it's waning, or it's not dwindling. It's just that he's not given the credit, he never was. He's not. Musicology has never given Tchaikovsky much credit, because musicology doesn't know how to analyze the quality of a tune. It doesn't know how to explain why something that is ravishingly orchestrated and melodically voluptuous is successful, even though it may be formally rather stiff. And that kind of sums up Tchaikovsky. So people don't give him much attention, at least the attention he deserves. And even I haven't, I have to say, because I follow the recordings. And in doing these chats, I've been trapped. We do tons of Mahler and we could do Shostakovich, we could do tons of Bruckner. It's coming from all sides today, and deservedly so, because Tchaikovsky is incomparably the finer composer. He really is. And, in terms of, versatility and mastery and imaginative daring and conceptual, all of those things. So it's time to get back to Tchaikovsky. It really is. And I'm very, very happy to start talking about recordings of some of the symphonies individually. I did a cycle talk. I did my ideal Tchaikovsky cycle. But now I want to talk about recordings of some of the individual symphonies, at least the last three, and maybe we'll be able to do some of the others, although they're difficult to do separately, because the symphonies 1, 2, and 3 tend not to come in separate recordings. They tend to come packaged together and in complete cycles. So you wind up just churning through the same cycles over and over again. But maybe we'll have an opportunity to talk about them separately as well. We'll see how well you all respond to these talks about numbers 4, 5, and 6. Because my goodness, it's also quite difficult to assemble the recordings for these talks because there are just too many of them. So many of them and so many good ones. And so many good ones, there was a period where it was expected that conductors would do, for example, the Pathétique symphony. And so every conductor in the world did it. Many conductors, the most famous ones, did multiple versions of it. And as a result of that, there was a period in the 50s, 60s, and into the 70s where they were coming thick and furious, as Mahler symphonies would later. And it was very, very difficult to winnow out the best ones. And I mean, I've had that problem. I've been going through piles and piles of Tchaikovsky Pathétiques. It's amazing how many there were. And now that it's not being done as well, I was afraid that if I did a talk, it would sound like I'm hopelessly aged, that I'm always talking about my record collection from the 60s or 70s of older performances by dead conductors and not giving enough credit to today's conductors. But there are quite a few performances here by conductors who are not dead, who made fabulous digital recordings of this music, and I will be very, very happy to discuss those too. I think they're enough to, give you the sense that we should not completely write off the modern generation of conductors, even though most of them don't seem to be terribly sympathetic to Tchaikovsky's idiom. So, here we go. Who are we going to do? I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, around 16, 17, 18 performances sitting here. It's a lot. It's really, really a lot. So I propose to go through them fairly expeditiously. Let's start out. These are in no particular order, by the way, until we get to the end, when I'll come to my top 3, my favorites, and we can talk about that when we get there. Karajan. Now, Karajan, was wanted to be the great, German conductor of the standard German repertoire. But as I've said over and over again, that wasn't really what his forte was. And it wasn't what his forte was because his whole sonic concept, that is the incredibly lush strings and the woodwind and brass instruments that could be enormously powerful. There's some performances where he just goes crazy and it's amazing. But most of the time, he really wanted the string textures to be first and foremost, and everybody else kind of took a back seat. He was a wonderful conductor to create a glorious sonic sheen. Very, very good for Tchaikovsky. And he recorded Tchaikovsky as much as he recorded Beethoven, maybe more so in the case of some symphonies. I mean, he did them 3, 4 times on disc, over and over and over and over. I mean, he did them in mono, he did them in stereo, twice for EMI, 3 times for DG. Some of them really unbelievably frequent Tchaikovsky guy. And that may have been Karajan's strength as a conductor, and there's no shame in that. I find it fascinating, that German conductors particularly, when they did Tchaikovsky, they kind of think that they're slumming. They're kind of doing something somewhat tawdry because we all know they ought to be doing a German composer who couldn't orchestrate, like Schumann, for example, and trying to make sense of the orchestral mud that constitutes his orchestration. But Tchaikovsky happened to adore Schumann, only he knew how to orchestrate. And that's the difference. So, Karajan did great Tchaikovsky 6s. He did a whole pile of them. This is his classic DG one. What's the date of it? I'm trying to figure out. It was in the 60s, sometime in the 60s probably. And it's terrific. It's terrific. The orchestra sounds wonderful. The performance is totally on point. It's emotionally expressive. It never turns cold. It's not merely slick. It sounds very idiomatic. Karajan's Tchaikovsky is beautiful. So let's just leave it there. So there he is, Karajan, Pathétique. Now here's sort of a sleeper performance. This is one that took me by surprise. I hadn't heard it in ages. I got it on a Japanese RCA, RCA kind of had a great run of Tchaikovsky Pathétique symphonies. They really, really did, because we're going to talk about a bunch of them on RCA. But this is Jimmy Levine with the Chicago Symphony. And like I said, it was a Japanese RCA. It's coupled with Stravinsky's A Soldier's Tale suite. If you know, it's just totally like not not something you would normally want to hear with your Tchaikovsky Pathétique. It makes quite the foil to it. But wow, it's a terrific performance. It's just a terrific performance. I mean, Chicago did several very fine Pathétiques. I mean, Schulte did one, and Barenboim did a very, very good one. But I liked this one, this Levine. And one of the problems is that we really could use, if RCA is listening, which doesn't make any difference, a box of all of Levine's Chicago recordings. You know, they did the Ozawa Chicago recordings, the Martinol Chicago recordings. They really should do the Levine, because you've got fantastic Brahms and all kinds of other things. There's Mahler and God knows what else. The problem, of course, is that Levine is a little bit on the outs now because of the Me Too business and his sexual peccadillos. Fortunately, he had the good sense to die. And so maybe he will have escaped the worst of it, because once they're dead, we can sort of forgive it and forget it. So, you know, although he's pretty freshly dead. But the bottom line is, this is a wonderful Pathétique, and it was thrilling to hear it again. Levine in Chicago. If you hear it, if you get a chance to hear it, give it a shot. I think you may be very, very pleasantly surprised. It really surprised me. I was very, very happy to hear it again. Now, one of the guys, I mean, we have to talk about a whole slew of Russian people, of course, because the Russians make a career of doing this symphony, and there were a bunch of really, really good Russian performances. One of them that I'd like to get out of the way right away is Gergiev. And the problem with Gergiev is that he's done it already 3 times, which, you know, he's not even that old. It's so stupid. He did a really, really, really good one with the Kirov Orchestra on Philips. Naturally, it's out of print. One of the easier ones to find is his remake, which he did with the Vienna Philharmonic, which basically sucks. I mean, it's just not very good. And then he remade it with the Mariinsky Orchestra, which was the same as the Kirov or whatever they are. I don't know how they work, and I don't care, and don't tell me. I don't want to see a comment about it. The bottom line is, it's not so great either. So his best Pathétique, which is marvelous, is very, very hard to get. It was on Decca, and I mean Philips, and now it's Decca, and I saw it recently on Amazon for like $47. And I don't know where it is or what it's doing, so I'm not worrying about Gergiev, although it was very good. I think, to start with, we have to deal with Svetlanov. Now, Svetlanov was, I mean, these are 2 Svetlanovs. One of them is the studio recording he made in Moscow, and the other is the live in Tokyo one. They're both just blisteringly insane, over-the-top, hysterical Russian performances. And one of the things that's happened with interpretations of this symphony that I think we need to keep in mind is that as time has gone on, in my opinion, a lot of the conducting of this symphony, when it isn't just boring, I mean, the better performances have gotten cruder. Svetlanov was crude. He was a crude conductor, but excitingly crude. And when he was on, it was tremendous fun. It really was. And this Tchaikovsky cycle, this late one in digital, which is really well recorded, this Moscow one, and then the live Tokyo one are wonderful. And it's Pathétique is just bruising. It makes you sweat while you're listening to it. And you should. I mean, a lot of people want to sweat when they hear it. And I don't blame them. I don't blame them. But it's also worth pointing out, and this is a point I have to make, that Tchaikovsky was also a composer of incredible elegance, extraordinary refinement. I mean, Gunther Schuller made the remark in his book, The Complete Conductor, that Tchaikovsky is one of the most careful composers of all in terms of marking his scores, in terms of, you know, indicating, for example, when to play tremolos, whether they're, you know, that are unmeasured as opposed to measured tremolos, when to have, you know, gradations of dynamics. He goes down to 6 Ps for pianissimo, to triple forte, or quadruple, you know, everything is carefully scaled and graded. And his melodic inspiration, his balletic background, gives his music an unsurpassed elegance and refinement as well. And we tend not to value that. We don't value it because it's It's harder to hear. You have to listen more carefully. It's not just like having everybody sit by and blast the crap out of the thing. He never used more than 2 trumpets. His orchestration is very, very modest, all things considered, for late Romantic composers. We're used to like Strauss and Mahler, people like that who used, squads of brass and woodwind instruments. Tchaikovsky didn't do it, and he didn't need it in order to create the splendid effects, the orchestral color, the highly saturated, gorgeous colors, glowing colors of his orchestra. He did it all with relatively modest resources, and he achieved some of the most volcanic climaxes in Romantic music that way. And so we need to give him credit for that, and we need to give performers credit who realize that aspect of his music. It's never bought at the expense of the hysteria. That's built into the music too. But the degree, the balance of elements is different from performance to performance. And, there were some conductors like Ormandy, who is not in this list, by the way, for the Pathétique anyway, because his Sony recording, which is his best one, isn't available right now easily. You can also get it from Japanese Sony, but, go find it, and it's expensive. So I left him out. But my point is that a lot of great Tchaikovsky, especially in the 50s and 60s, was not the loudest Tchaikovsky, but it was the most refined and elegant and beautiful. Karajan was a Tchaikovsky of that type, and we're going to see some others. So I don't want to hear it's not as exciting as such and such. Well, such and such, like Svetlanov, could be unbelievably exciting, but there are always compensating factors, and it all depends on how you judge them and what you're in the mood for. So I just wanted to throw that out there so that you understand that I'm trying to come up with an optimal mix that gives, all of the elements of the symphony their due. Anyway, so there is, this is one of the most recent Tchaikovsky cycles, which is absolutely superb. This is Vladimir Yurovsky. And Yurovsky really knows how to play Tchaikovsky. This is with the London Phil. These are beautiful, beautiful performances, and it's a wonderful Pathétique, and it's good to know that there are still conductors out there who know how to give us passionate, spontaneous, wonderful Tchaikovsky performances. This is on the LPO's own label. It may be out of print too. I don't know. Things are coming and going so quickly. Usually they're available for streaming. So you should keep your ears and eyes open for the availability of these things. Next, let's see. Oh, yeah. And this is a classic. We're going from most recent to less recent. Antal Dorati, often forgotten and ignored and unjustly maligned. He was a splendid Tchaikovsky conductor. This is his Mercury Living Presence Tchaikovsky cycle, which sounds fabulous. He was the first conductor to do complete Tchaikovsky ballets. That was considered unheard of. You always did the suites. Complete ballets were just not done. And then we began to realize just how wonderfully symphonic and magnificent that music was, all of it. Maybe with a few judicious cuts here and there, so we don't have to hear everything 100 times. But Dorati's Tchaikovsky cycle is one of the great ones, and it's with the LSO, and I just love it. On Mercury Living Presence, give it a chance. Give his Pathétique a chance. I don't want to recap just all the cycles that we did. I'm trying to find some singleton performances as well, and I have. But we have to include the ones that are in cycles, and you don't get them separately anymore. Everything's been boxed up. Some of these you'll see are going to appear as album cover photos because I just don't know. The individual performances are either out of print or in a box, some huge box somewhere. I'm not going to go, it's in here, get it. I'm not doing that. But Dorati is a fabulous Tchaikovsky conductor. Another one where you only find it in the box, unfortunately, in this case it's a big box, is Zubin Mehta with the Los Angeles Philharmonic. Now, we did a whole video on just what a wonderful legacy the Mehta Los Angeles recordings really represent. They are terrific. And his Tchaikovsky cycle was excellent, mostly. It had its better things and less better things, but his Pathétique is terrific. It's a terrific Pathétique, and you should not write it off. If you have the big Zubin Mehta box, the Zumeda Los Angeles box on Decca because we did a talk and you all rushed out and bought it, I would give it a chance. Take out the Pathétique, give it a listen. It's a very fine performance. It really is. And now I want to talk about some of those aforementioned album covers. Let me see. Which one are these? Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah. First, let's talk about this one. Vladimir Ashkenazy with the Philharmonia. This was one of the great Pathétiques, and I remember when it came out, it was sonically marvelous. It was such, when I was talking about balance, talk about a beautiful balance between the spontaneous passion and hysteria school and the eleganza school of Tchaikovsky. It's a great Pathétique. It's one of those Pathétiques that you can it really stands the test of time very well. I return to it regularly, and now it's boxed up with a Decca twofer that has Tchaikovsky's 4, 5, and 6, and it seems to go in and out of print. But and by the way, I don't think that 4 and 5 are as good. But the Pathétique, that was the outstanding performance in the Ashkenazy Tchaikovsky symphonies cycle. I mean, the first one, I mean, God knows how many he's done now. I'm not even going to go there. So that's one. Another one that you may have missed and that is definitely worth hunting down is this one, Daniele Gatti with the Royal Philharmonic on Harmonia Mundi. Harmonia Mundi has treated these performances dismally. They came out individually. Then for a while they were boxed up in a little 4, 5, 6 thing, and then it's all disappeared. And probably won't come back anytime soon because Gatti, as you know, was dismissed from the Concertgebouw for doing naughty things with his female colleagues. And I'm not making light of that. That's a very, very serious accusation. He, of course, denied it all. And he seems to be, I've heard stirrings that he's sort of popping around in the back. He was an odd duck anyway. I mean, in terms of, his visibility and where he showed up and what. But he did these Tchaikovsky symphonies, 4, 5, and 6. They were terrific. They were terrific. And Harmonia Mundi should bring them out or bring them back or do something with them, but I'm not entirely sure that they ever will. So if you see them kicking around, give it a shot. It's worth considering. And the last one in my list of things that I'm not going to search out a twofer or a huge box or whatever for is this one. Bernstein, New York Phil on DG. Oh, I have such affection for this performance. The reason I do is because it's the review that sort of sealed my career as a record critic, because Bernstein read the review. And he read the review and he wrote to my editor at High Fidelity and said, yes, this guy understood what I was trying to do. And that made me feel so good. That was in High Fidelity magazine. And I think that it's a performance that's often misunderstood. And it's misunderstood, as I said then, because Bernstein has a reputation for being sort of wayward and self-indulgent and narcissistic. But that wasn't what I heard. This is the famous performance with like the 16-minute finale or 18 minutes or whatever it is. It's the slowest ever. And it's very dark. And Bernstein himself, when he made the recording, said that's about as far out there as you could possibly go and still hope to come back when it's over. It is a tremendous performance, magisterial, moderate in tempo, and very, very, despite the power of the climaxes, especially the first movement and the third movement, which they're volcanic, but it's balanced. Somehow what he's trying to do is balance that huge first movement with an equally imposing finale. He's doing it in light of, for example, Mahler 9. And so it's not going to be a Pathétique that will appeal to all tastes, but it is a magnificently realized, completely legitimate conception of the work. And if you love the piece, you really should hear it. You really, really should. And that is all I'm going to say about it. I could go on because there's some fascinating parallels between that and the Mahler Ninth, and not just the slow finale, by the way. So maybe that's a subject for another video, and we'll be able to talk about those things. Now, Continuing now with my last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or so of these. Oy, oy, oy. Unbelievable, isn't it? I mean, so much choice, so much excellence. And that's the problem, isn't it? I mean, who has time for all of this great stuff? And it's only one work. Multiply that by thousands, hundreds of works, with dozens of recordings of each. It's incalculable. It's daunting. It really is. And if you're starting out as a record collector or a classical music person, and you know that Tchaikovsky's famous, you want to get a recording, I'm telling you, don't worry about which one you get. Any of these will do you really, really well. You'll understand the music, you'll get into it, and if you love it and want to hear other versions, you go from there. And you'll be okay. There is no holy grail of classical music recordings. No one performance that's going to unlock the key to some higher level of understanding. You don't know. It may be a terrible performance that gets you hooked. It's entirely possible and perfectly legitimate. So any of these are going to be good. Don't panic. Stay calm. I'm doing this for all of the people who have some additional background as well, but also for you guys who are just starting. You don't have to hear all these. You don't. It's okay. That's why I did this. So if you don't want to, you don't have to. Let me see here. Oh, yeah. This is one of those performances that falls more into the elegant school than the hysterical school, but there is no want of power or passion in the performance at all. Monte, Boston, 1955, an excellent stereo. It's a wonderful, wonderful performance. Monte did Tchaikovsky Symphonies 4, 5, and 6 in Boston, some of his few stereo recordings for RCA. After that, remember, he was in London with the London Symphony Orchestra doing recordings mostly for Decca and some for Philips. But these are wonderful performances of Symphonies 4, 5, and 6. Effortlessly lyrical, intensely beautiful. It's terrific. It's sort of like Carillon without what some people consider to be the excess of sheen, the slickness sometimes, because there's no slickness here. It's just wonderfully, wonderfully rhythmic and very French somehow. And great Russian music is French. I mean, a lot of it is anyway, because the Russian school was basically the French school. It was the ballet school. The culture came from France. The language of the aristocracy was French. And, Tchaikovsky spent quite a bit of time in Paris. And, this is a wonderful, wonderful Pathétique, and from a great, great conductor. And it should never be forgotten, and it comes up sounding fabulous in living stereo. So Monte in Boston is worth considering. Essential as well. Back to the Russians. We had to mention Ravinsky, didn't we? I think for most people, the Ravinsky performance that really, really, is the knockout is number 4. Only because of the tempo in the finale, which is patently insane. These are swift performances. But to hear the Leningrad Philharmonic at that time, which is now the St. Petersburg Philharmonic, again, playing at this level, and these were studio recordings from 61, like some of the very, very, very few that Ravinsky ever made. The set has been classic since the day it was issued, and it's essential. It's absolutely essential to hear their way with Tchaikovsky. This is not sentimental Tchaikovsky, but it is intensely, vibrantly alive and passionate and disciplined. Oh boy, this is the you will play in tune or you will go to Gulag. Oh yeah, phenomenal, phenomenal performances. So Ravinsky, you got to hear. And oh yeah, yes indeedy. Another terribly underrated Tchaikovsky cycle. This is one of my favorites. I mentioned it in my talk on Tchaikovsky cycles. Performances are gorgeous. Haitink in the Concertgebouw. Once again, Haitink was one of those conductors. He could be very plain and very, very dull in standard Germanic repertoire. He was never very good at Beethoven. His Schumann is a snooze. His Brahms could have been more exciting, except for the serenades, which are the best ever. But in music that had sort of the excitement built in, where all he was asked to do is is apply his sterling, really wonderful musicianship and the orchestra's unbelievably fabulous sonority to the music, oh, you could get the most wonderful, wonderful results. Haydn is a bit like monte in the sense that it's more elegant than noisy, and you tend not to think of the conductor at all. The music just goes. It just does its thing, and it does it so marvelously. It goes down easily. Doesn't mean it's not exciting. Doesn't mean it isn't emotionally affecting. It's all of those things. It's all of those things, but it achieves that in a special way through really wonderful, wonderful ensemble and color and texture and balance. And, there are many paths to paradise, and this is one of them, Haydn and the Concerto. Now, this is a genuine historical recording that I wanted to mention. There are a lot of historical recordings of this symphony, but I'm only talking about this one. And it may be a surprise to some of you because it's a sleeper. It's one that most people are not aware of, but you really should hear it. This is the Soviet conductor, Alexander Melik-Pashayev. Now, Melik-Pashayev spent most of his career at the Bolshoi, and he fell, as so many people did, he fell afoul of the authorities and was removed and died soon afterwards. He had something of a tragic career. He was lauded by Galina Vishnevskaya. If you've read her book, her fabulous, fabulous autobiography, Galina, which everybody should read, if only for the parts about Shostakovich, she talks about him with great, great admiration, and he's the conductor on her recording of Boris Godunov and some other things. He was a wonderful, wonderful conductor, an aristocrat in many respects, a real class act. And here he has this is from 1960. I think it's mono. Of course, they don't really tell you what it is. I mean, I've tried to figure it out. I was looking, and even if it is mono or stereo, it really doesn't matter because, as I pointed out, 1960s melodia recordings, whether they're mono or stereo, sort of sound the same anyway. And this is coupled with Schubert's Unfinished Symphony, and it's on Melodia. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful Pathétique. And if you think that Russian performances are always sort of raw and crude and loud and crazy, this is a wonderful corrective. Not because it isn't loud and raw and crude and lewd. No, it's not lewd, crude and crazy. It really is a fabulously poised performance where the natural Russian intensity and edge is all somehow bent toward the pure expression of the music. It's a wonderful performance in very mediocre sound. But if you can find it, give it a shot. You will not be sorry. I guarantee it. And that's Melik-Pashayev, who I just dropped. And maybe it was the end of Melik-Pashayev. Yes. Of course, his name was A. It was Alexander, actually, but you always see A everywhere. And this is a disc called From the Conducting Legacy of A. Melik-Pashayev with the USSR Bolshoi Theater Orchestra. And you get a really good Schubert and finish, too. It's fun to hear that. Wonderful, wonderful experience getting to know this conductor's symphonic work as opposed to just his work in the opera house. And let's see. We have to mention this one, of course. Markevich. Now, we just did Markevich in the big box, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This was originally on Philips. This is the Newton Classics budget reissue, which I think no longer exists. It's one of the all-time great Tchaikovsky cycles, and Markevich's Tchaikovsky was also of the unsentimental, incredibly precise, poised variety that managed to be extremely exciting, but also not too soggy. And they're just great performances. They really are. And I'm just going to leave it there because we've been talking about Markevich a lot lately. And you know at this point that you need to have his Tchaikovsky. You simply have to. And that's the end of that conversation. But now I'm down to my top three. My top three, believe it or not. One of them is, here we are, Muti with the Philharmonia. Now, Muti is one of those endless number of conductors who did more than one Tchaikovsky Pathétique symphony. He redid it in Philadelphia for Phillips, but his great one, his really great one, was this one with the Philharmonia that's in the big Muti box. It was originally on EMI, now it's on Warner, and gosh, it's fabulous. And there's also a separate box of Muti doing the Tchaikovsky symphonies. For like 10 minutes, it was available on Brilliant Classics. So that's where this box came from. I have the other one, but it's under a pile of stuff. So you'll get the point. Muti and the Philharmonia, this is such a great Tchaikovsky cycle. And the Philharmonia really was a wonderful Tchaikovsky orchestra at this period. Witness Ashkenazy's Pathétique, which came a little bit later, I believe. I'm not going to, try and parse the dates, but they are wonderful performances, both. But Muti's, oh my God, it has such intensity, razor sharp articulation, amazing Italianate lyricism. Tchaikovsky's melodies were Italian, fundamentally Italian. Mahler said so. Mahler said that Tchaikovsky's melodies were Italian melodies, which of course they were. And Stravinsky also said that Tchaikovsky's melodies were Italian melodies, which is what made his music so attractive. That intense vocal lyricism that you hear combined in this performance with a feeling of orchestral discipline and just a white-hot intensity. It's just tremendous. Absolutely tremendous. So, Muti, and it's still probably available and not too hard to get your hands on. It's a great Tchaikovsky cycle and a fabulous Pathétique. But now I get to deal with two singleton performances. We can put away the cycles, and these are my top two. The first, and this may surprise some of you too, because it's another performance that doesn't get talked about. Munch and Boston. Normally, people talk about Monte in Boston, which is on RCA, and the other great RCA performance that is not on my list was Reiner in Chicago. And, the other RCA that is on my list was Levine in Chicago. Like I said, there are so many of these, and keeping track of them all is such a project. But, and the Reiner, I just have to say, is a very, very fine performance, and many people love it. I think it's a little cool. Reiner was always a little cool, in my view. And this is a piece that I think just needs a little bit more panting and heaving. And then Reiner was willing to pant and heave. Now, Munch, panting and heaving was his specialty, as we all know from his Berlioz. This guy is intense, and this is a fabulously intense Pathétique. My goodness. It has all of the intensity that his Berlioz has, that spontaneous, explosive passion. But again, we're dealing with the Boston Symphony and with a tremendously great orchestra at this period that also had the discipline and a wonderful characteristic sound, a French sound, which works very well with Tchaikovsky, a certain leanness to the sonority, a cutting edge to the brass timbres, crispness to the rhythms. It's just fantastic in this piece. And I have to say, this is not the most important thing by any stretch of the imagination, but it has the best soft tam-tam in the finale that you will ever hear. Everybody should listen to this performance, to that single soft ad-lib. It does this, right? And I mean, I've got some tam-tams like this one that would do it beautifully, but I have to say, Munch really nails that one moment. It will send a chill down your spine, as it should. It really should. And boy, it's great. So, but I mean, don't get it for the tam-tam. Get this because the third movement is exciting as hell. The first movement is fabulous. The waltz-like second movement is glorious. The finale is incredibly despairing and intense and dark. And it's fantastic. You will love this performance. It's phenomenal. So, just great. However, we have gotten to the end, yes. And I have to say, my all-time favorite Pathétique, which I believe is the one in my ideal Tchaikovsky cycle. I didn't go back and look, but probably it is. Or if it wasn't, it could have been. It's Free Joy the free choice stereo version. I have this in so many different incarnations. I could pull out like 4 different CDs with different covers from different series, because at one point this was very, very hard to get. It really was, because this was recorded in '59, and I don't think it was released while Free Troy was still alive. There was some issue with he wanted to retouch something or do something. I don't know what it was. It was extraordinary. It is absolutely extraordinary. As I think I said before, I think I didn't go back and check, but I should have. I'm sorry. Forgive me. I was too excited pulling all these together to go back and look at that other talk. But the bottom line is, this is the most communicative performance of the Pathétique I think I've ever heard. Every phrase seems to mean something. It just hits you in the solar plexus. Free Troy was like that. I've said that about Hungarian conductors. They had a way of phrasing, a way of projecting a melody, of carrying over, a string tune. It's how they handled things like vibrato and the intensity of tone and timbre that just made the music so intensely expressive. It's as if someone is revealing some sort of intimate confession, and it's like no other experience of this symphony. There is also a live one on Orfeo that he did that's in mono, but very, very good mono, that's quite similar in sense to this one. But this is the stereo. It's stereo DG, because there were some mono ones too, various Tchaikovsky symphonies. And wow, with the Berlin Phil, not the Berlin Radio, Berlin Philharmonic, the Philharmonic. Except that this is not the Berlin Philharmonic. What am I saying? It is the Berlin Radio. Just ignore me. It's tremendous. It's just tremendous. One of the most amazing performances you'll ever hear of Tchaikovsky's Pathétique. And it is not the Phil. I'm looking at this. It says Orchestra Radio Symphonique de Berlin. I was looking in the French. But it is extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. I was a happy camper the day I was able to finally get a hold of this, and I have never looked back, and neither will you. So Free Troy, Berlin Radio Symphony Orchestra, Tchaikovsky Pathétique for the ages. But like I said, these are all very, very fine performances. An extraordinary piece of music that deserves to be regarded as such again, and played that way by these conductors. It would be so good to see some non-Russian conductors come out and do this stuff and do it really, really, really well. But until then, I'm very happy we have this unbelievably rich recorded legacy of fabulous Pathétique performances, and we'll take it from there. So keep on listening, folks. Go to the classicstoday.com shop, which you can find the link below this video, and get your stuff. Although I wouldn't recommend listening to the Pathétique while you're shopping. It's not really a incentive, I think, to go and enjoy the shopping experience. But do listen to the Pathétique as well. Take care. Bye-bye.